The sun-warmed leather of the saddle groaned under him with a sound like a dying man's sigh, the stench of justice gone sour clinging to the back of his throat. He spat, but the taste wouldn't leave. It was the taste of hot dust, of his own sweat, and of knowing something was wrong, way down in the pit of his gut. Up ahead, maybe 200 yards through the shimmery desert heat. Two riders moved slow and sure through the canyon pass. Between them, on a lead rope, was a big bay mare with a proud head. Even from here, he could see she was a fine animal. And she didn't belong to them. His name was Silas. He wore a deputy star pinned to his worn shirt, and it felt heavy as an anvil today. For 3 hours now, he'd been trailing these two. It had started simple enough. Old Man Peterson had ridden into town, face ashen, saying to men had run off with his best horse right out of his south pasture. The sheriff had just nodded, sipping his coffee, and looked at Silas. You know that land. Go fetch 'em back. So Silas had gone. It was the job. Find the thieves, get the property, bring everyone in for the judge. That was the law. It was clean, or it was supposed to be. But nothing was clean out here. The first hour was easy tracking. The thieves weren't trying to hide their trail. It was arrogant, the path they'd cut across the sky. By the second hour, as the sun climbed from breakfast height to a punishing noon ball of fire, Silas had closed the distance enough to see them clear. One was tall and thin in the saddle, riding stiff. The other was shorter, thicker, laughing at something. And the bay mare stepped delicate, like she was favoring her right side. Now, in the narrow stone hallway of the canyon, Silas held back. He watched. This was the last normal moment. The trailing, the watching, the patient work of it. A lawman's work. He pulled his canteen, took a small swallow, the water already hot. He checked his rifle and its scabbard out of habit. The walnut stalk smooth under his fingers. Everything was by the book. Then he saw the hairline fracture in the whole day. The tall rider turned in his saddle to say something to his partner, and the sun caught the side of the bay mare. On her flank, just behind the shoulder, was a dark, wet patch. It wasn't sweat, it was too dark, too localized. And as she took another step, the patch glistened. Fresh blood, but it wasn't the neat hole of a bullet. The pattern was wrong. It was a spray. Then long, angry lines. The kind of mark a man makes when he's not trying to kill an animal, but to hurt it. To punish it, the kind made by a whip, or the blunt end of a rope. Silas's breath slowed. The law in his head said horse thief. The blood on the mare said something else. Something uglier. His jaw tightened. He nudged his own horse, a steady dun gelding, forward a few more yards, using a scrubby pinyon pine for cover. He needed to see better. The shorter thief pulled a bottle from his saddlebag, took a long drink, and threw it against the canyon wall. The glass shattered, a tiny sharp sound in the dry air. He laughed again, a sound that didn't carry joy, but a mean kind of glee. Thor one just stared ahead, his face a blank mask. The mare flinched at the sound, and that's when Silas saw the rest. On her other flank, older marks crisscrossed the hair. Faded, but there. This wasn't the first time. The law was simple, apprehend and deliver. But the sight of that blood, those old scars on a fine animal, it put a cold rock right in his chest. This wasn't just about theft anymore. This was about a particular kind of cruelty. The kind that enjoyed its work. He thought of his own brother, 2 counties over, who loved his horses more than most people. He thought of the careful, gentle way you were supposed to treat a creature that trusted you with its strength. A hot, slow anger began to burn away the dust in his throat, mixing with that sour taste. He had to get closer. He had to stop them here, in the canyon, before they hit the open plain on the other side where they could run for miles. He checked the wind out of old habit, was in his face. Good, his horse wouldn't give him away. He was about to step out from behind the pine, to call out and announce himself as a lawman, to do it by the book, when the tall rider did it for him. The man's arm snapped out, quick as a rattler. He wasn't holding reins. In his hand was a short, heavy quirt, a riding whip with a braided leather tail. He didn't swing it at his own horse. He laid it hard across the bay mare's fresh wound. The sound wasn't loud, just a wet, solid thwack. But the mare's reaction was, she screamed. A high, terrified horse scream that tore through the canyon's silence and echoed off the red rocks. She reared up, her eyes white-trimmed with pain and fear, jerking the lead rope from the shorter thief's hand. And in that moment, everything changed. The book snapped shut. The theory of the law met the brutal practice of the world. Silas didn't think. His body moved before his mind could form an order. His hand went to his rifle, yanking it free. The metal of the barrel was so hot it nearly burned his palm. He levered a round into the chamber, the click-clack sounding as loud as the mare's scream to his own ears. He stepped the gun out into the open. He was 100 yards off, now, clear in their sight. The shorter thief was cursing, fighting his own spooked horse. The tall one had already stuffed the quirt away, his hands now hovering near his gun belt, his face still that eerie blank. Silas raised the rifle, not at them, but at the sky. A warning shot. That was still procedure, but, as his finger found the trigger, the mare, wild with pain, bolted straight toward him, her tack jangling, her hooves kicking up great clouds of dust, and from the tall thief's mouth, a single line cut through the chaos. Loud and clear and full of a knowing contempt. It was a line that would haunt Silas, that would make the star on his chest burn. The dust settled, but the knot in Silas's stomach only tightened. He cinched the ropes on the two horse thieves, their sneers doing little to hide their exhaustion. It wasn't just about his prize stallion Blackheart anymore. As he'd tied them, a glint of metal caught his Ajar silver locket, half crushed in the dirt. His heart plummeted. It was his sister-in-law's, the one his brother Elias had given her on their anniversary. This wasn't just a theft, this was an attack on his family. He practically dragged the men and the recovered horse the last 10 miles to the dusty outpost of redemption. The sheriff's office looked as weary as he felt, the woods sun-bleached and leaning like a tired old man. Sheriff Brody was slumped over his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey his only companion. The smell of stale liquor and regret hung thick in the air. Sheriff Silas's voice was a low growl. "Caught these two with my stallion." Brody barely looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He gestured with a lazy hand toward the cells. "Good work, Silas. Lock 'em up. We'll get the paperwork done in the morning." "'S more than that, Sheriff," Silas insisted, shoving the thieves toward the bars. "They came from my brother's place. I found this." He slapped the locket down on the desk. The silver gleamed under the lamplight. Elias's homestead. They must have attacked them. The sheriff picked up the locket, turning it over in his calloused fingers. Sighed. A long, rattling sound. "Silas, I've got 2 men in custody for horse theft. That's a clear-cut case. I can't go chasing ghosts based on a piece of jewelry. Maybe she dropped it. Maybe they just found it on the road. Found it. Look at them." Silas jabbed a finger at the men now slumped on the cell cot. They reek of desperation. "These aren't simple horse thieves. My family could be hurt, or worse. And what do you want me to do?" Brody's voice rose, a flicker of irritation cutting through his lethargy. "Right out there in the dead of night, with my one good deputy, who's halfway to the next county. I have to follow procedure. Silas, the law is the law. We have them for the horse. The Jets, we'll see them in a month, maybe 2. A month too." The words were like a physical blow. Silas felt the air leave his lungs. His brother, his wife, his little niece. Anything could happen in 2 hours, let alone 2 months. The world outside this dusty lamplit office was vast and unforgiving, and the law, the thing that was supposed to protect them, was a slow, grinding machine that cared more for process than people. "You don't understand," Silas whispered, his voice cracking. "This isn't about the horse anymore." "To the law it is," Brody said, his tone final. He capped his whiskey bottle and pushed it away, a gesture that seemed to signal the end of the conversation. "Go home, Silas. Get some rest. We'll handle it. Handle it." 2. The words echoed in the silence. Silas turned from the desk, his gaze falling on the thieves in the cell. The leader, a man with a wiry frame and cold, dead eyes, was watching him. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of understanding. He knew the system. He knew its deliberate, infuriating pace. 2. He knew that by the time the law figured out what he'd really done, it would be far too late. In that moment, Silas saw a twisted reflection of himself in the bars. He was a man who believed in order, in justice, but the justice offered here was a pale imitation. A bureaucratic shuffle that offered no comfort, no speed, no real protection. The bars didn't just hold the thief, they held Silas captive too, trapping him in a system that was blind to the real danger. The law hadn't caught a monster, it had merely filed him away. And as the thief's smile widened, Silas knew with chilling certainty that if his family was to have any justice, it wouldn't be found in this jailhouse. He would have to find it himself, out there, in the dark, there. The realization settled on him, heavy as a shroud. He gave one last look at the smiling man, a silent promise passing between them. Then he turned and walked out into the night, the sheriff's useless reassurances fading behind him like a forgotten dream. The law had failed. Now, it was his turn. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The impossible. Choice laid itself out in the silent room. Option 1. Wear the badge. Accept this. Trust the system. As slow and flawed as it was, do his job. Maybe the judge would see through the lies. Maybe the rider would find his brother's family safe and sound, just scared. He could go back to his little house, hang up his gun belt, and sleep. Or try to. Option 2, break it. Take matters into his own hands. But then he became no better than them. Right, a man taking the law into his own hands was just a vigilante. He'd be throwing away everything he'd stood for. He'd be the one in a cell. The office clock ticked. Each tick was a grain of sand falling. An hour until sunset. A day until the rider left. 2 days until the judge arrived. A month until a trial. Each tick was a measure of how far the truth could run and hide, while the law got its boots on. From the cell, the wounded thief's groaning stopped. There was a wet, ragged sound. Tick. Silas a second to realize it was laughter. A broken, pained, but genuine laugh. The sheriff heard it too. He frowned, but didn't get up. The laugh grew a little stronger, fueled by pain and something else, a deep, ugly amusement. It was the sound of a man who saw the joke, and the joke was on Silas. That laugh was the final crack in the foundation of everything Silas thought he knew about right and wrong, about law and justice. They weren't the same thing. They lived in different worlds. One was ink on paper, the other was blood on sand. He looked at the sheriff, who was now pretending to read a wanted poster. He looked at the wavy glass, at his own haunted reflection over the grinning prisoner. And then Silas realized his belief in the badge was a lie. It wasn't a tool for justice. Not here, not now. It was a tool for order, and sometimes order was the very thing that let cruelty slip by with a smile and a lawyer. The star on his chest wasn't a symbol of honor anymore. It felt like a brand. A mark of his own complicity in a game that was rigged from the start. The laughter from the cell finally subsided into a cough. In the sudden quiet, the clock's ticking sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Silas didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the office, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. He stood on the wooden porch, the evening sun painting the dusty street in long, guilty shadows. He had 2 days. And a choice that was no choice at all. The moon was a cold sliver of bone in a black sky, offering little light and no comfort. The town was asleep, or trying to be. From the saloon, at the end of the street came the tinny sound of an out-of-tune piano, a last lonely gasp of the day's business. Silas stood in the deep shadow between the feed store and the blacksmith's shop, not moving. He'd been there for an hour, watching the sheriff's office. His rigid sense of honor, the very thing that had made him a good deputy, was now a tool. It was a blueprint. It told him how a man who followed the rules would think, would act. So, he thought like the sheriff would think. The sheriff would lock up, blow out the lamp, and go to his house behind the livery for a late supper. He would trust the old iron lock on the jailhouse door. He would trust that 2 men, 1 wounded, wouldn't try anything foolish in a stone box. He would trust the system to hold until morning. Silas watched the lamp's glow in the office window wink out, saw the sheriff's bulky silhouette step onto the porch, stretch, and amble down the boardwalk toward home. The town settled into a deeper silence. The piano stopped. He waited. He counted the slow passage of time by the movement of that bone-white moon across the seam of the sky. It was past midnight. The world belonged to the owls and the things that moved in the dark. Then he moved. Not like a lawman. A lawman would walk up the steps, key in hand. He moved like a ghost, keeping to the shadows, his boots making no sound on the packed earth. He circled around to the back of the jail, to the heavy oak door that led straight into the cell block from the alley. The lock here was older, a simple iron hasp and a padlock the size of his fist. It was strong against a shoulder. It was useless against knowledge. From his pocket, he pulled a small, oily leather roll. Inside were 2 pieces of hardened steel, slim and precise. He'd never used them for this. They were tools for fixing a gun's mechanism, for prying a stubborn stirrup loose. Tonight, they were keys. His honor had made him meticulous. His meticulousness now picked the lock. The padlock gave a soft metallic clunk that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. He froze, listening. Only the wind. He eased the door open. The inside air was thick with the smell of unwashed men, blood, and stale straw. A single barred window, high on the far wall, let in the thin moonlight, painting the 2 cells in stripes of silver and black. The wounded thief was asleep on his cot, his breathing a ragged, wet sound. The tall one was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, awake. His head turned slowly as Silas stepped inside. The man's eyes gleamed in the dark. Silas didn't speak. He walked to the cell door. The lock here was simpler. A big iron bolt slid it back. The noise was a grinding shriek in the quiet. The wounded man stirred, mumbled in his sleep. The tall one didn't get up. "Change of heart, deputy," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. Silas said nothing. He opened the cell door, stepped inside, and pointed his pistol at the man's face. "Get up, quiet." The tall man stood, slow and easy, that familiar calm still on him. He thought he knew what this was. A beating, a threat, a lawman blowing off steam. He even smiled a little as he stepped out of the cell. He looked at the open back door, a rectangle of lesser darkness. What's the play? Gonna make a run for it and blame it on me. Silas ignored him. He walked to the other cell, looked at the sleeping wounded man. He thought about the laughter. He thought about the toy horse. He left him there. This wasn't about him. He shut the cell door and slid the bolt home, locking the wounded thief in alone. The tall man's smile faded. He was starting to see this wasn't a fit of temper. This was something else. Something focused and cold. "You're making a big mistake." Silas jabbed the pistol barrel into the man's back, hard. "Walk out the door, toward the livery. Make a sound, and I save the hangman a job." They moved through the alley, two shadows merging into one. Silas had already saddled his dun horse and another, a plain brown mare from the livery, in the hidden drawer behind the town. He bound the tall man's hands in front of him with a pigging string, helped him roughly onto the brown mare, and tied his ankles under the horse's belly. He mounted his own horse and took the mare's lead rope. They rode out of town, not at a run, but at a steady, ground-eating walk. The sound of the hooves was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert night. The tall man was silent for a long time, sitting stiff in the saddle. The moon tracked their progress, a silent witness. After an hour, when the town's lights were just a faint smudge behind them, the man finally spoke. His voice had lost its oil. There was an edge in it now, a slit of fear. "Where are we going?" Silas didn't answer. He just rode. The canyon country lay ahead, a maze of rock and memory. By the time the first gray light began to bleed into the eastern sky, they were there. The same canyon. The air was cold and still, holding the memory of gunshots and a horse's scream. Silas rode them right to the spot. The ground was scuffed from the previous day's struggle. A dark stain was still visible on the sand where the short thief had fallen. He stopped, he dismounted, pulled the tall man from the saddle. The man stumbled, his legs stiff from being tied. He looked around, recognizing the place. The first real flicker of panic showed in his eyes. This wasn't a escape, this was a return. "What is this?" the man demanded, his voice louder now. "You can't do nothing here. You're a lawman." Silas walked to his saddlebag and pulled out not a gun, but a shovel. He'd strapped it there before leaving town. He threw it. The shovel's blade bit into the sand at the tall man's feet with a soft thump. The man stared at it. He looked from the shovel to Silas's empty hands, to the pistol still in Silas's holster. The understanding dawned on him, slow and horrible. This wasn't an execution. An execution was quick. This was something more primitive, more final. Silas's voice, when he finally spoke, was flat, lifeless. It held no anger. That made it worse. It was just a fact, delivered in the cold morning air. "Start digging," Silas said. "One for the boy." The words hung there. The tall man's calm shattered. His face crumpled, not into fear, but into a frantic, snarling rage. "You're insane. I don't know any boy. You got nothing. It was just a horse." "You knew his locket," Silas said, not moving. "You knew it would hurt me to see it. That means you saw him. You were there. Now dig." "I ain't digging my own grave." The man screamed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. He lunged, not at Silas, but toward the brown mare, his bound hands grabbing for the saddle horn, desperate to mount, to run. Silas didn't draw his gun. He took 2 quick steps and drove his fist into the man's side, just below the ribs. It was a brutal, efficient punch. The man gasped, the air whooshing out of him, and folded onto his knees in the sand, retching. Silas picked up the shovel. He planted it back in the sand, upright, in front of the kneeling man. He squatted down so they were eye to eye. The man's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "Sees, you can dig 1 hole," Silas said, his voice still that terrifying calm. "Or I can dig 2. 1 for you, and 1 to put the truth in after I beat it out of you. Your choice." The transformation was complete. The deputy was gone. In his place was something older. Something the law tried to fence in but never could quite kill. The tall man saw it. He saw the absolute certainty in Silas's eyes. This wasn't a bluff. The law was 2 days behind them. Out here, there was only the sand, the shovel, and the consequence. The man's shoulders slumped. The fight bled out of him, replaced by a trembling animal defeat. He looked at the shovel. He looked at the stained sand. With a sob that was half rage, half surrender, he reached out a bound hand and wrapped his fingers around the rough wooden handle. The first scoop of dirt was the hardest. The sun was fully up now, a clean, hard light that showed every crack in the land and every line on a man's face. Silas stood by the 2 horses. The brown mare flicked her tail at a fly. His dun gelding stood steady, patient, ahead of him, in the flat area at the mouth of the canyon. The work was done. The earth was raw, a dark scar against the pale sand. The tall thief sat on the ground beside it, his head hanging, his clothes soaked with sweat and dirt, his bound hands raw and bleeding. He was empty. All the oil, all the calm, all the smugness had been dug out of him and left in that hole. Silas had listened. A man had talked between shovelfuls, the words coming in gasps. He hadn't needed much prompting after the first 10 minutes of digging. The story was ugly and small. They'd ridden past the homestead looking for easy stock. The boy had been in the corral, brushing the big bay mare. The woman had come out of the house, calling him in. They'd meant just to take the horse. The boy had yelled, had tried to block the gate. The tall man had used the quirt to clear him out of the way. A backhanded swipe, the boy had fallen. The woman had screamed, running toward him. They'd just ridden off, fast, the mare in tow. They hadn't stayed to see if he got up. The locket and the toy were just things they grabbed from the porch table as they rode by. Spoils of a mean, hurried crime. "Is he alive?" Silas had asked. Just once. The digging had stopped. The man had stared into the hole. "I don't know," he'd whispered, and it was the first true thing he'd said. Now, it was over. Silas walked to the man. He didn't look at him. He looked at the hole. It was a good 6 feet deep. Neat. The man had been thorough in his fear. Silas took a coil of rope from his saddle. He tied one end around the man's chest, under his arms. The man flinched, thinking something else was coming. Silas walked to a sturdy pinyon pine at the canyon's edge and tied the other end of the rope to it, leaving about 15 feet of slack. Enough for the man to sit, to stand, to lie down. Not enough to reach the horses or run anywhere meaningful. He tossed a full canteen and a small sack of hardtack into the dirt beside him.
The tall man looked at the rope, the food, the water. Confusion washed over his exhaustion. This wasn't the plan he'd imagined. "The sheriff's rider will find you by tomorrow," Silas said, his voice rough from disuse. "Or a posse will. If you live, you'll tell the judge exactly what you told me. You'll sign it. If the boy is dead, you'll hang for more than horse thieving. If he lives, you'll still hang for the attempt, but you'll tell the truth first." Silas turned and walked back to the horses. He untied the brown mare's lead and slapped her on the rump. She trotted a few yards away, then stopped, confused. She'd wander. She'd be found. He mounted his dun. He didn't look back. He rode for an hour, the sun climbing, before he saw the dust on the horizon. A rider coming fast from the direction of town. He recognized the shape. It was the sheriff. He reined in and waited, his hand resting on his thigh, not near his gun. The sheriff pulled up hard, his horse blowing. His face was red, his eyes wide with a mix of fury and disbelief. He looked at Silas, alone, then scanned the empty landscape behind him. "Where is he?" The words were barked out. "In the canyon," Silas said. "You kill him?" "No." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He was putting it together. The missing prisoner. The missing shovel from the livery. "What did you do, Silas?" "I asked him a question," he answered. "I left him for your writer to find. He'll talk. He'll sign a confession. You took the law into your own hands," the sheriff roared. "You broke him out. You tortured a confession that ain't worth the paper it's written on." "It's the truth," Silas said simply. "And it's more than you were gonna get." The sheriff stared at him, his chest heaving. The fury slowly drained, replaced by a deep, weary understanding. He saw the change. The deputy he knew was gone. The man in front of him was someone else. Someone who had walked into the void and come back, carrying a different kind of weight. The sheriff's shoulders slumped. He looked old. "Your star," he said, his voice flat. "Give it here." Silas had expected it. He unpinned the tin badge from his shirt. The metal was warm from his skin. He looked at it for a second, at the faint engraving, the little dents and scratches from years of service. Then he held it out. The sheriff took it, his fingers closing over it. It disappeared into his pocket. "Right on," the sheriff said, not meeting his eyes. "Don't go back to town. I won't hunt you for this. But if I see you again, I'll have to." Silas nodded. That was fair. He nudged his horse, moving around the sheriff. "The rider came back from your brother's place at first light," the sheriff said to his back. Silas stopped. He didn't turn. "The boy's alive," the sheriff said, the words heavy in the quiet air. "Bad concussion, broken arm, he'll mend. The woman is shaken up, but fine. They're tough folks." A wave of something relief so profound, it felt like weakness washed through Silas. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the sun bake the sudden dampness from them. He nodded again, a small motion, then he rode on. He didn't go east toward his own small spread. That life was close to him now. He turned the dun west, toward the distant blue humps of the mountains. He rode for most of the day, the landscape changing slowly from desert to scrub hills. In the late afternoon, he came to a lonely stagecoach relay station. A young hostler took his dun to water. Silas went inside the refuse barn, and there she was. The big bay Murray stood in a clean stall, her coat brushed, her wounds smeared with a yellow salve. She turned her head and looked at him with a soft, intelligent eye. She whickered softly, a low sound of recognition. The station manager, a grizzled old man, nodded toward her. Fuller brought her in last night. Said she was evidence, but needed tendon. Said to keep her here till someone came. Silas walked over. He ran a hand over her neck, down her shoulder, avoiding the salve on her flank. The sun-warmed leather of her new saddle, bought with his last deputy's pay, was draped over the stall gate. It was simple, serviceable, and strong. He lifted it, feeling its weight, and set it gently on her back. He cinched it, his hands doing the familiar work. The leather didn't groan. It was silent and supple. The stench of justice gone sour, that had clung to him for 2 days, was finally gone. Blown away by the desert wind, replaced by the simple, honest smells of horse and hay and oiled leather. The weight of the badge was gone from his chest. In its place was a different weight, the weight of the choice he'd made, the lines he'd crossed. It was heavier, but it was his to carry. He didn't feel clean. He felt true. He led the mare out into the yard. He tied her lead rope to his saddle horn. He would take her home. He would see his brother's family, see the boy's face, and know the cost had been worth it. Then he would ride on. The law was behind him in the town, a set of rules that couldn't reach where he was going. The trail ahead was just dust and duty of a different kind, and a quiet he could finally live with inside his own head. He mounted up. As he rode out of the station yard, a single fat drop of rain landed on the brim of his hat. Then another. The first rain of the season, long overdue. It hit the dusty ground, darkening the earth, promising erasure and new growth. He didn't look back. The sound of the hooves on the now dampening trail was the only goodbye he offered.